Hey dreamers, as you can see I've set up a new board now that I'm trying out some of the new features. New features, I say, features I haven't used before. So this will hopefully help clarify the purposes of my lives. Uh, Trying to figure out how to add this sticker back. Hello there. Ah, here we are. I think. Let's see. Where was that? Still just looking around at there it is. Okay, I'm gonna leave it. Okay, I'll get started. So this is week 5 of Kiki's Big Dream Experiment. Over the past couple of weeks I've been doing these lives where I just chat about my theme of the week, and this week I've got this board up to show you what the theme is so you can join in a bit more easily. So as I chat away, feel free to chat in the send comments, share your stories, ask questions as well, and just be polite as well. I won't tolerate any unfair name calling and such like that, so you'll be muted if that is the only reason that you're here. This week's theme is unexpected upheaval, and it comes from, actually I probably should have got this ready beforehand, but I'll show you now. It comes from card number 16 of the tarot, the Tower. And this card represents, those moments in life where things just seem to be falling apart around you and what that might mean. It can be very debilitating. And yeah, I mean, the fact that unexpected is in the name is because these things are unexpected a lot of the time. The common one that I hear is tragedies, accidents, death, but there's a lot of other unexpected upheavals that can appear, if you lose your job, or a friend stops talking to you for some reason. Hey Cormac, favorite gay person? Um, it's hard to pick a singular one. I've been watching Agatha all along over the Christmas, Halloween season, and there's a lot in the show that I really enjoy. So I suppose at the moment I've got Agatha in my mind. I don't know how she's portrayed in the comic books, but at least in the TV show, she is shown to be gay or bisexual anyway. And just following her story in the show has been really interesting. So I'm just going to say Agatha Harkness for now. Omar from The Wire. I haven't watched The Wire, but it is on my list because my husband keeps talking about it. So I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thanks for sharing. The Yeah, thinking about this theme of unexpected upheaval, people like having stability and comfort. I think we all do. And unexpected upheaval comes along and disrupts that in some kind of way, and it can be really exhausting. It can be really debilitating because you start wondering like, why is this happening? You know, um, Typical things of like, why is this happening to me? I've just been living my life the best way that I can. Sorry to hear that, Pete. Yeah, I mean, that's textbook like unexpected upheaval. Your father passing away suddenly, and it is life changing. Really, your entire worldview changes because of that, and you have to find a way to move forward in some way and deal with the circumstances of that. And um, unless you spend time obsessing over these kinds of things, it's very hard to, if you do spend time obsessing over all these things potentially happening, you forget to live. So then you have to balance living and worrying, you know? And it is really difficult. I hope you're in, I hope you're doing better now. Uh, I know it's kind of easy for me to say that. I don't know fully your circumstances, but the fact that you're sharing that at all, I think is healthy. Uh, I, I change around the days that I'm doing my content. I decided to do my TikTok lives on Tuesdays and do my streaming on Wednesdays. And it's made me think about things a little differently in my week. I'm sorry to hear that you have witnessed that. You know, I think it can go both ways. Um, Obviously, it sounds really traumatic, a thing to witness. And I suppose, you can't change what's happened. There have been times where I've sort of gone through something like this, right? But I've not kind of been there when it happens. And what I find from that is that there's so many questions that I have about it. Is there something I could have done differently? Um, if I had made a different decision, maybe I would have been there for the person. And I think there's always this element of, things could have been different. I could have done things differently. I could have been elsewhere. Um, and it's very easy to get stuck in those thought patterns because, what else is there? What else can you do? It's a really tough one. I was talking yesterday on my podcast about this theme that it's really difficult to talk about because people tend not to talk about difficult things. And when we do, I think sometimes we feel this pressure to kind of have all of the answers, you know? And we don't. We don't always have all of the answers. We just know what our circumstance is and what we're feeling in the moment. And so just sharing what we're going through is important. You don't need to have a clear, conscious train of thought. Um, and sometimes I think we expect that people will, when a lot of the time we're just lost trying to figure out what's going on. And so we don't need all of these questions about, like, what are you going to do next? Because when you don't know the answer to that, those are the questions that you're asking yourself. And you just don't want other people to be asking those questions as well. And it makes you not want to share anything. And I think part of that is because, other people are reflecting these inner thoughts back at you, and they're kind of making it real that you have to figure things out. And sometimes you just need time for that. I've been trying to think of my own experiences with unexpected upheaval, and what I found over the years is that the more I've recognized that I don't have control over something, the less I feel like it has impacted me. Or at least, let me rephrase that. The less I feel stuck by the idea or the experience. So, when my paternal grandmother passed away over 10 years ago now, she was the first grandparent who passed away. She wasn't necessarily sick or anything, it was quite sudden, but she was 84. And, she died peacefully in her bed. Um, and it was so strange because that morning was just like any other. My aunt was getting her breakfast since whatever had gone in to speak to her in the morning. And I think, I don't really remember if this is how it happened, but this is the way that I remember it. The way that I remember it being told to me is that, she went in to check on her in the morning and she was in bed fine with my granddad. Um, my aunt left to go and make breakfast and stuff, and then when she came back in, my nana had passed away in like that short amount of time. And I don't think my granddad even realized it at the time. You know, when you're like sitting beside someone and you know that they're there doing their thing and you're off reading your book or newspaper or whatever it is, you don't necessarily notice when there's a change happening unless it's kind of significant, if they stand up or they move around and so on. Um, and so the fact that it was so sudden and out of the blue, I think, was the scary part. But I remember everyone was saying that, it was a peaceful way to go in your sleep, in your bed with people around you who love you. I remember being at work and I got a phone call from my dad, and I thought this was a bit strange, but I couldn't answer it because I was doing something or I'd missed the call. Um, and so eventually, when I got in contact with him and he told me, it was just, it was like a normal day. I wasn't expecting anything to come from it. And because of that, there's this little part inside me that is always wondering, like, is there something going to happen today that will change my life? Um, and that's scary, if you get stuck in that mentality, because the more you keep asking the question, the more that eventually you're going to be proven correct. Something will happen, and you're like, yes, I knew it. I knew today would be the day. But what about all of the other days that nothing happened? You disregard them. I have been, I've always been a person who like believes that things happen for a reason. You know, there's going to be external circumstances that you can't control. And when I say that things happen for a reason, it's partly because, you know, there's a cycle of life and death and all that. But for everything that happens, we react in a way and we can learn from it. We can learn how we react. And we can decide if, you know, that reaction is something that we want to uphold, if we think that, you know, it shows us in the best light. And if it doesn't, then there's things we can do to change that. And this, I think, is what has been driving me to always say that things happen for a reason, that there's some lesson to be learned from it. And eventually you learn the lesson, you know. Um, you can tend to stick on the negative parts of it. Like I definitely went down this road of thinking, okay, well, one grandparent has died. It's only a matter of time before other family members die as well. And who knows, you know, I could be next. I mean, if I am next, then I don't need to worry about everybody else. Um, but if you get stuck in that cycle of worrying about everyone else, you forget to live and appreciate them. And the more the time goes on, the more I think like, how can I make the best of my time with people? And it does take time, but eventually you start to appreciate things more and you're grateful for the time that you get with people. You know, you realize that you only spend a fraction of their time on earth with them. A couple of years ago, I saw someone online talking about how, you know, they were talking to a friend of theirs and was saying that this person was talking about how each summer or each winter they go and visit their parents for 2 weeks because they live so far away from them. And those are the like 2 weeks that they see them during the year. And their friend was like, you know, oh, what do you do during that time? Chatting away about stuff. And then the friend pointed out, you know, what age are your parents? You know, how many more times do you think you'll get to do these 2 weeks? And it made the person kind of pause and reflect because they had, you know, fallen into this routine of like, oh, every Christmas I'll go and spend time with the family. But, you know, if their parents are in their 70s, uh, how many more years are there going to be where you can spend those 2 weeks? When you start thinking about things like that, it really puts into perspective how little time you're spending or this person is spending with them. And I think that's something that we all have to do is to examine like where life is going, where we're spending our time. Because it's so easy to get caught up in our own life that we forget to stay in touch with the people around us. So yeah, something like death will always make a question like the purpose of life as well. But there's a lot of other unexpected upheavals that can appear. So I found myself hitting a lot of them when I left Canada last year. I've been in Canada for 2 years with my husband, and we were there just for 2 years. That was it while he was training, and then coming back home. So when I got over there, I was very cognizant of I'm only here for 2 years. I need to make the most of it. I need to meet people, go to events, concerts, parties, socialize with people, try things I haven't tried before because they are so accessible now in the city, in Toronto. And I had brought my job over to Canada with me. And so when I was leaving Canada, I was thinking of all of the things that I was losing. I was going to not have all of these friends around me that were so accessible that like I could decide on a Wednesday to go out for a drink or go to a life drawing class or something, go to play pool with them. And I also didn't have my job either. I decided to leave it because it wasn't something I wanted to continue anymore in the way that it was, in the way that it evolved. And so when I was leaving Canada, I was leaving my social life, my friends, my job. And I had realized that so much of my identity was wrapped up in those things. I had spent so much time dedicated to my job and my friends and my social life that without those, I didn't really know who I was anymore. And that is where this unexpected upheaval came from because I was now faced with having to build a life back home where, like, I had things, I had a house, I had family and everything, but what was I going to fill my time with now? And that's where the real grief and, the sense of life falling apart came up. And I didn't really expect that emotional impact of it. I think because I had been so conscious of, wanting to make use of my time, when I finally paused and had a break from doing anything, suddenly all of this worry and fear and anxiety caught up with me. And I had to then deal with that. It took me a couple of months to really get settled. I realized that part of the grief and all of this experience was me coming down from burnout. I didn't have the words for that before, and it's very hard when you spend 100% of your time with yourself to recognize the things that are going on. It's so much easier to see it in someone else, you know? And so I wondered, did other people see it in me and not say anything? Or was I so good at coping with it outwardly that it didn't present as burnout? And I think a lot of that was subconscious to a degree, because you're always told to give 100% at work, to show up perfectly every day. And you do the best you can to show up perfectly every day, even if it means that your personal life at home is falling to pieces. You get up in the morning and the last thing you want to do is go to work, but then you go on a call and everything is happy and perfect. And so the people you interact with see life as being happy and perfect, so they don't say anything. And then when it's difficult, oh, you're supposed to leave your personal life at home, don't bring it into the workplace. And I find that so difficult to do because how can you compartmentalize so much that you like become a different person in the workplace than the person you are at home? It seems like such a waste of energy to be doing that, to always be thinking about, am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing? I would love for people to share their thoughts and experiences as well. Um, if you resonate with any of this, let me know because I wish I could have found people to talk to about these things when I was going through them. And I think there's a certain gift about social media that we don't really pay attention to, and it's the fact that it's so easy to talk to strangers, because you start to bond over what you have in common. And I think a lot of people have struggles like this that we can connect with. When you are speaking to people that you're around all of the time, I think there's this inherent need to want to problem solve and to like not let you feel the bad feelings. But you can't help that. And trying to solutionize and ask probing questions because you want to know what led to this, it isn't helpful. Asking questions out of curiosity to help the person express themselves, I think, is important. You know, when I got home, one of the things is I hadn't told my family that I was leaving my job because I didn't want to deal with having to answer questions and say, oh, I don't know what I want to do next. I just want to take time off. And I don't really have the words to articulate why I left my job. I just had this inner feeling of knowing that I needed to. And the first question I was asked was, oh, when are you back to work? You know, I've just come back after 2 years of being away, and your first question is, oh, when are you going back to work? Why does it have to be work? Why is it always why is it always work? Now I think there's an element of, if you're going back to work in 2 weeks, oh great, you have 2 weeks to spend with me. I think there's an element of that, but um, I think we should be a bit more mindful of the way that we talk. um, it took me about 15 months to really articulate all the feelings I had about leaving my job and why I did. I didn't write, so all of my former colleagues used to write posts on LinkedIn about why they left their jobs, talking about what a great time they had and all the experiences and opportunities they had and all the wonderful connections they made. And yes, I had all of those things, but there was a lot about it and the circumstances that I didn't like. There was all this social politics that was veiled as professionalism, but it was really people being secretive about their motivations for their own gain. And some of it is just subconscious. They're kind of like, oh, it's just part of the game, you have to play it. Like, we don't need to play this game. We can make up our own version of the game and play that instead, and not treat people as numbers, treat them as people with ideas and value and perspective. Um, and I think that's what was. I was getting more and more evidence that, this is all that we are. I'm just a number on a page because the value that I'm contributing for some reason doesn't align with the goal that you're aiming for. And what I found so difficult with that is that everything was just no, no, no. There was no conversation about, well, why is it that you are resistant to my idea? What is it about your goal that this isn't me trying to meet? And the excuses people came up with were like, it was very obvious that they made no sense. They're like, oh, this isn't going to work. It's like, you don't know that. We haven't tried it before. You haven't done anything like this before. How do you know it's not going to work? All I'm saying is to try it for a week and see what happens. Based on my experience of doing all of these new things and knowing my team, I suspect there's a lot of good we can get from it. No, 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 it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Okay, well, why can't we try it for a week? Oh, because it's not going to work. Give me something else, please. Oh my God. What if it does work? No, but it's not gonna. What if it does work? What if a little part of it works? It's not going to. Can you tell the future? Can you give me the lottery numbers? Because apparently you know exactly how all of this works. And the fact that you know how all of it works and you're not helping means you're just using it to serve yourself. That's how it comes across. That's how it feels. I didn't really have the words to articulate all of that in the moment because, well, I was burnt out for one. All I knew was that my body was telling me that something was wrong, and my mind was too far ahead to recognize what it was. Oh, I'd like to hear from you if you connect with any of this. If you have, oh my God, I keep hitting my ring light. If you are, I don't know, going through something like this or have done in the past, let me know what your experience is as well. The You know what's funny is I've been trying to think about this theme of unexpected upheaval because I decided to leave my job. I decided myself to take time off work. I decided to move from Canada to Ireland. And so part of me is wondering, like, why am I so surprised by the outcomes of these decisions? Why am I surprised that I'm feeling a grief and loss of direction for not having a job? Why am I feeling grief and disappointment for leaving my friends behind? I should have expected these things. And I think it's because the reasons behind my decisions were always because, okay, this is the best decision for me for XYZ reason. But I wasn't paying attention to the life I was losing because of those decisions. And that's where the unexpected upheaval comes about. Your life is different now because of the decision that you make. And we can't always prepare for that because sometimes we don't know how much something is going to have an impact. Because you're so used to it being there as a safety net, and suddenly it's gone, and you're like, oh, shit. Now what? What's going to fill that instead? Because you start to realize, oh, I'm more vulnerable now in some way. And eventually, this is the unexpected bit. It's the things that happen that you weren't expecting to happen, right? And this is coming from when you make decisions. You then get in your head so much about, like, have I made the right decision? What am I going to do now? I fucked everything up. Uh, but you know inside you that it was the right decision because the alternative is that you continue on with this life that is wasting your time and wasting your energy and you don't feel fulfilled by entirely. And I think these are the two kinds that we experience. So the unexpected upheaval that comes from decisions you make, and then the unexpected upheaval from life's circumstances. So earlier on, when I was talking about death, you have no control over what happens outside of your ability to make decisions. And sometimes that's easier to let go of. If the Earth suddenly crashes into another planet, can't help that. None of us can help that. We're so small. And I think this is something that has been on my mind over the past couple of weeks, is this idea of scale. When you can impact something that you are on the same scale as or is smaller than you, then what comes into mind is all of these worries of like, are you making the right decisions? Because your ability to work and pick a job, that is a level of scale that you are in control of, right? Same with if you're raising kids or looking after animals. You've got a dependent that you're responsible for. And so all of your decisions are going to impact them. And so there's a certain level of worry and fear that things aren't going to go right, because you have to begin to trust yourself that the decisions you make are the correct ones. Then on the other side is when the scale is so much bigger than you have to reckon with this idea that you don't have full control over everything. You have to let circumstances happen. So if the world does crash into another planet that appears out of nowhere, then we're all helpless. We can't do anything about it. And that's going to cause panic, right? It's the same with death. We can't control death. It's a natural order of things. We're born and we die, and we know that is inevitable. And death is one of those unknowns that is scary for people. And it can hold you back. It really can. Because there's certain parts of life that you don't ever try to explore as a result. And so, yeah, this idea of scale does affect the way that an unexpected upheaval can manifest itself. And I think it's easy to let the big things. Now, maybe this is just my experience, but the big things that you don't have control over, I feel like it's easier to let go of that and to learn to take those things in your stride in some way. But I find it really difficult to get the smaller things under control and to feel like I'm making the right decisions. And I think part of that is because, I want to do so many things in my life. That's why I'm doing these TikTok lives. That's why I'm doing Kiki's Big Dream Experiment, where I've given myself 90 days to do kind of whatever I want, but whatever I want in terms of things that work towards dreams I have. So, like a couple of months ago, you can go back through my old TikTok videos and see that I really struggled to speak on camera because I was stuck in this perfectionist mindset of I need to have a script. Oh, I didn't stick to the script. What am I going to say now? Oh, I have to record it again. And like some of my earlier videos that are a minute long took half an hour or an hour to make, which is crazy. But that's where I was back then. And it's only from playing with the discomfort that I can now go on camera like this and just talk into the void for an hour, you know? But it's something I wanted to do because I could feel that there was a lesson in there for me. And what I've learned is that I can trust the way that I articulate things, the way that I explain things, that I'm mirroring, how I think. And how I think is not linear. It doesn't feel linear. I don't know if it comes across linear. But I've had so many conversations in my life that people are like, sorry, stop. Explain that again. What are you talking about? Because I've just gone off on a tangent, but it's not a tangent. It's important relative information. But it's kind of skewed away from the point that I was trying to make. And I think I've always got back to the point eventually. The problem is that I'm trying to curate like how much of a tangent am I going on, and that's a skill in itself. Some people are amazing storytellers. I always like to think I'm a good storyteller, but I'm not. I don't think I'm like captivating or charismatic in that way. But when I say that I'm a good storyteller, I feel that it's more on the message and the meaning of the story and what you take away from it. So that's why I wanted to do lives like this. I write articles online. I stream video games now as part of Kiki's Big Dream experiment to see, you know, how I talk and tell stories when I'm doing something different. I'll speak very differently on TikTok Live than I will in my individual videos because on TikTok Live, I feel like I'm talking to a big group of people. But in my individual videos that I make on TikTok, it feels like I'm talking to one person. I don't know why that is. It just is this perception I have. And then when I write an article, I know it's going to an audience of subscribers. And on Instagram, then when I post poetry, it goes to my followers, and non-followers, I suppose, are going to see it as well. And the message behind poetry is going to be quite different. I'm conscious now that I'm in the like final quarter of my hour for my live, and I want to talk about like what comes after the unexpected upheaval. You know, the world has shattered in some way, and you have to pick up the pieces and you decide this one is good, I'll keep it. This one, no, go away. Don't want you anymore. You're looking at what's left over, trying to figure out what can I make now? And you realize that there's all this empty space in between because you've thrown away some pieces and you're like, how do I fill in this gap? I can't remember the name of the art form. I think it's Japanese where, you use gold. It could be Chinese. Um, I'll have to look it up to make sure that I know what it is in future when I speak about this, but use gold to like repair a crack in something. And so you have to add something back in to repair the picture, right? And that's where the power comes from these unexpected upheavals. You end up losing something, whether you're destroying it yourself or circumstance is doing it. You wind up with this void of some kind, and you have to decide what to fill it with. So when I left Canada, I had no job, a job that was, 40 hours a week. I now had 40 hours a week to myself. My social life, I still connected with people on social media, but, it's not the same. It's not the same as like going to parties and hanging out socially with people. And so I had to find a way to replace that too. And then the other part is I wasn't expecting to have like this identity crisis as well. And, I went through a form of ego death, I suppose, where I lost such big parts of who I was at the time that it didn't feel like there was anything left. And I had to figure out, like, well, no, I'm still here and I'm still me, but what does that mean? What does that really mean? And so over the time that I had a break from work, I started to recover from burnout. I started to realize that I had experienced burnout. And then I was starting to make small changes to live life again. I started this year. There's always this thing of like New Year's resolutions. Um, and I like the idea behind them that you make a commitment to yourself, right? But so many people said to me, like, yeah, but why do you need New Year's to make a resolution? Just make a commitment to yourself. Okay, fair enough, but why can't you just let me have the thing I like? If I like making a New Year's resolution, just let me do that, you know? Because for me, there's a certain meaning to it. There is this element of, oh, it's a new year. And the more you say it, the more that becomes true. And it comes down to how you frame things, When it was my birthday this year, I was thinking, I love my birthday. I know a lot of people don't like their birthdays, but I really like mine. And I don't necessarily know like why or where that came from. Maybe it was just because it was one day where people were celebrating me for being me and being alive and, not looking at the things I've accomplished, just looking at the fact that I'm still around. And I think maybe that's what it is about birthdays that I like so much. And so I built some, I guess, rituals around my birthday. And I'm kind of seeing now that my birthday is like that's where I want my year to start. Because I'm making a commitment to myself. Because that's where like my year starts. I was born in July. I get to the next July, and that's 1 year. When you get to January, I was only 5 months old. And yeah, then I would go into this new cycle of, 12 months. But I think part of it is that so much of my life has been starting in the summer and ending in the summer because that's how school works. You start in September, you finish in June or whatever time frame. I started work in September and I ended up finishing in June. My husband's a doctor and all of his rotations start in the summer and go for 6 months or 12 months. Even the company I was with, our financial year was the end of June. So there was all of this rhythm with summer being the start and the end. When, so much of life is that we measure things according to January because it's the start of the calendar year. But it doesn't need to be that way. Oh. So I had started to give meaning to my birthday and what I wanted to accomplish for the year and really focus just on myself, what I wanted to do. And what I did was I did a couple of things. One of them was I wrote a letter to myself for next year. I wrote down the things that I wanted to do, the way I wanted to feel about my year. And I have it like over there. I can see it from here in an envelope. And so it's something I'm looking forward to opening next year. And I was thinking, like, next year I'll write a letter to myself the year after. I've even decided, like, how will I overlap these? And so what I've decided I'm going to do is next June or so, I'll start coming up with ideas, and then I'll write a letter for myself the year after. Then I'll read this year's letter. Um, and in next year's letter, I'll just add a PS for, anything that came up from the previous year, so that there's like this continuity between them. The other things I've done is I saw this ritual online called 13 Magical Nights, where you make 13 wishes for your year, and over 12 nights you burn one of them, and at the end you're left with one of the 13, and you're supposed to focus on that goal. And the idea is that you let the universe kind of look after the rest of them. And I remember what some of them are. I don't know that I remember all of them. But the one that I did pull out, I'm currently working on at the moment. It was to take part in a musical production. And so that's what I'm doing. Last night we had dance auditions. We had singing auditions a couple of weeks ago, and like this is how I'm taking part. I'm trying out all of the parts, and whichever ones come to me will be the ones that I stick with. But I wouldn't have got to do all of these things if I didn't have the unexpected upheavals that came with leaving my job and leaving Canada and leaving my friends. Because I had to then find out, okay, what do I want to do with my time? And this is where we'll call it personal breakthrough comes in. Because you find a way of moving on with life and building something better than you had before, using all the experience that you had. And I'm sure things will come up that like shatter this new reality, but it just gives me a chance to build something more. Even this week, what I had done for Kiki's Big Dream experiment is I've got weekly themes. I think about that theme through my different pieces of content and how it shows up. But I'm also, one of my goals for this was to have a different theme every week so that I can kind of react naturally for how I'm growing through the experience. Hi there. Yes, go ahead and ask a question. So I'm on week 5, and one of the things that I came up with. Am I a rainbow flag? Yes, I guess. If that means queer LGBT community, yes. That's me. One of the things I had come up with was building a collaboration program with people, and I've been trying to articulate that. I'll answer your question in just a second. I want to finish this thought while I have it. I wanted to build this collaboration program with people, and I've taken some steps towards it, and I found that I was hitting a barrier, a kind of mental block of like, I don't know if I'm doing this right or if it's going to work out. And I said, okay, this week I have time to myself. I'll just go and try things out. And so I'm finding now that I've kind of launched into it, it is terrifying, but also bringing me on a path to like build something new, which I'm excited for. Great. As for your questions, when did you find out you were? Were you young? You know what? I think I always kind of knew there was something about me in the way that I was like different to other people, but it wasn't until I was a teenager when I like had the language for it. When like that's when people were talking about the labels of being gay and stuff like that. And I realized like gay doesn't really explain it fully, but I'm definitely not straight in the way that other people are straight. And then there's the other aspect of like puberty. You know, when you go through puberty and like your hormones go wild and you like grow into being an adult, um, you get really interested in sex usually, or sometimes you don't, and you then have to reconcile all of those things. So I would say it took me until I was in my late 20s maybe to be fully sure of what I was on the rainbow spectrum. What I noticed was I had an affinity for certain people, and I was trying to understand what that was. It was like I don't know, like an intuition or knowing of like, oh, I like you for all these reasons. Does that mean, is that romantic attraction? Is that platonic love? And you try to spend energy and time trying to figure out what that means. Were you ever attracted to women? Yes. So I I spent a lot more time with guys, right, in school. Um, and so I always had like that was the big burning question. But I had all of my friends growing up were mainly girls, right? And so it was kind of like the slow boil thing. If you've ever heard this analogy about like how you boil a frog, if you put a frog into boiling water, it'll jump out. If you put it into cold water and boil it up slowly, it'll burn. And it's a little bit like that. Like with women and girls, I was closer to them as a kid. So then when I started to develop as a teenager, I suppose there was a slow boil there that I didn't really pay attention to as much. But with guys, it was the opposite because I had always found such aggression with guys. I never connected as much. We didn't have similar interests and stuff. But then the odd time when we did, it was like it felt kind of more emotional and impactful, right? So they're quite different, but I would describe myself as bisexual. But trying to articulate the different ways that I am attracted to people is tricky. As for, you know, did I see people around that made me question it? I didn't because I grew up in a small place. I grew up in a um, I was in a small school. There wasn't anybody who was out. So it wasn't until university when I was 18 that I properly like interacted with people who were out in the LGBT community. So I feel like I discovered kind of all of this on my own. I think it can be difficult to understand it because like when you're straight, right, the whole world is built for you. When you're not straight, you see all of the ways that the world is not built for you. And so immediately you feel different. I was like when I was growing up as a kid, I had always imagined like getting married to a woman, having kids, doing all of that, right? And then when I started being aware of being attracted to guys, I realized, oh, I can't marry a guy because it's illegal in Ireland. It was until 2015. So if I get in a relationship with a guy, what is that going to mean? And it completely changes your worldview. Whereas when you're straight and you're going through the world and it's already built for you, you don't end up thinking about these things. And so you start asking questions about like why is it different? And I think some of it is just because you don't see how different it is. And that's why allyship is so important, and that's why advocacy is so important as well, to point out these things. That's why the marriage referendum in Ireland was so important, because it was just giving queer people the same rights that straight people had in terms of marriage. Uh, Catching up on some of your questions here. Okay. Yeah, there's homophobia is an interesting one because I think I've definitely experienced it, but I don't. I suppose it hasn't affected me, right? Because I've felt that the way that it's been put on me uh, doesn't feel real. So, like your question there about like a dominant person in a relationship and like the woman in the relationship, that is a myth that has been created because of the straight structure of like man and woman and these ideas of masculinity and femininity. And so you tend to like fit into the box in those relationships, right? But when it's two men, what about all of the like caretaking duties in the house? Well, we share those. Okay. Who works and earns money? We both do. Okay. And you go through all of the like assumptions for, who's the decision maker in the house? Is it the man? Well, actually, no, the woman rules the house, so she's the decision maker. We're both decision makers. I should probably clarify that right now I am married to a man. um, so yeah, these are all things that, I've just had to question as well because the straight marriage structure doesn't work for two men or two women because you both are going to embody both things. And this is what I've realized is that everyone has masculinity and femininity. It's about how you express it, right? But society puts this expectation on you that if you're masculine, you need to be the one earning money, you need to be the one being dominant and leading in a relationship, and you can't be shown to be weak by crying and showing your emotions. But if you're a woman, you need to be the caretaker, you need to care for the family, you need to put everyone else ahead of you. I think that we all need to do both of these things because we are all naturally both, I suppose. I mess with your mental health a lot up to this stage. I'm not sure what you mean by that exactly. Could you rephrase the question? My partner's not currently at home. He's working. Just like this is my work, I suppose. This is part of Kiki dreams big. It's what I'm building and doing with my time. Have you ever felt like you wouldn't be able to continue and be forced to be straight? No, because I suppose I knew in myself that my body and soul was reacting a particular way, right? But my mind hadn't caught up to understanding it. And it's only when I started to learn the language around it, to put labels on things, that I realized, oh, this is what straight means, this is what gay means. And when you start to divide them and understand the differences, eventually you get to a point where you look at them again and you realize, oh, they're the same thing, just with like different wrapping on them. And it comes back to this relationship dynamic of like a dominant and a passive person. That's a myth, really. We're dominant in certain areas. So, like for me, I'm a very mathematically minded person. I see systems and I pick up information in a different way to my husband, right? But one of the things that I absolutely love is numbers. He doesn't connect with numbers as much. And so, like, I do our taxes mainly and organize that stuff. When we were buying a house, I was the one doing the budgeting and figuring out like how much we can spend, where we can potentially go within our budget. And that's like, that was my input, right? But then his input was sharing like what he would want in a home, and I was going to have that input as well. But then there's other things like, you know, traveling around. I don't particularly have you know, a big want to live in a particular place. I can kind of make home wherever I go. Whereas he was leading where we live based on his work because of the nature of his profession, right? And so that was an area where he was more dominant. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll go along and do whatever bits. So you're going to have this ebb and flow. You'll be dominant in some places and you'll be less dominant in other places. And sometimes it'll just be 50-50. And sometimes neither of you will want to do it. And you'll have to like make up a way of dealing with that. So I suppose with this question of like being forced to be straight, I don't like forcing things because, like with anything, um, you can't necessarily control it all. You can decide to be in a straight relationship, right? But unless you feel that it's correct for you, you're not going to show up authentically and you're not going to be there and be the person that the other person deserves. So for me, I was just like, I'm just going to see like what happens and who I end up connecting with. And like me and my husband met when I was 19. We've been together for 14 years now. Like I couldn't have planned that. Well, I am bi. That doesn't change just because I'm in a relationship with a man. As for the question about confused about sexuality, I will say yes, but I want to clarify what that confusion is. I never had confusion over who I felt attracted to. The confusion came from trying to pick the label that fit that. And I had all these questions of, well, if I'm going to be in a relationship and a marriage with a man, does that mean that I am not bi anymore? And for years, I was like, yeah, I guess I'm gay. But even that didn't feel correct. So it doesn't dismiss that I still have attraction to women, which is why the bi label is right. But the way that I behave and the way that I act is dependent on like being in a relationship. Like I'm not going to go out and cheat on my husband with a woman. I'm not going to go out and cheat on him with a man. So the confusion comes from like always trying to label things, right? Because sometimes we find that the label fits for a bit, but then we see reasons that it doesn't fit. And at the end of the day, it's a word, right? It's so hard to articulate feelings and lived experiences in single words. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of worry about finances and growing up, and I think we see so much online now about what life is like. Um, I grew up in an age where the internet was kind of only just about a thing, and social media was only taking off. So my experience of life was I was seeing what other people around me were doing. Oh, we're going to college. Oh, we're doing this. Oh, we're doing that. Um, and now the world is such a bigger place in some ways because we can see much more of it, but it's smaller in the sense that like it highlights just how fragile life is. That worry and fear is it's important because if you don't think of those things, then something will happen someday and you'll wind up with this unexpected upheaval in a scenario where life has turned itself upside down. I've had moments where I was worrying about finances as well and had to find my own ways through it. So like when I was in college, the first couple of months I wasn't too worried about money because I had savings from over the years of like birthdays and communions and confirmations and bits and pieces. But then as I was nearing the end of my first year, when that money was running out, I realized, oh, this amount of money doesn't go very far. And so I started taking up jobs in university, doing tours for students. I was teaching as well and doing like odd jobs around the university and getting paid for it. And it was like enough to keep me going. And then I got a job and all of that was stable. I hope you come back at another live. If you want to follow me along and stay in touch, you'll see when I post my next one. But it was good chatting to you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thanks. Best of luck to you too. I think there's a lot of things in that discussion where unexpected upheaval comes in. So the discussion of sexuality, the fact that language and everything was used to describe the LGBTQ experience was throwing out this like new worldview that I had to like figure out. Um, because suddenly there were words to describe these things. What was coming with all of that though was homophobia in terms of using gay as a derogatory term and bullying people for being different. just because it was assumed that you're straight and straight is like the right way to be. And so eventually, like when you get enough information from these experiences and you see and you build a new world perspective, that you get to a point where you have like a breakthrough on that topic. So I would say I have a very open-minded view on sexuality because I've gone through having to challenge my perceptions on it. And it started with challenging my own feelings because I realized, oh, I don't feel the same way that other people expect you to feel, but I don't know how to articulate that yet. And I have to like do some work to figure it out. And like I definitely hid a lot of it as well in parts because I wanted to not have to deal with the questions. Like I didn't come out in school, even though I could have, because I didn't want it to affect my studies. I didn't want to risk being bullied by people and have to deal with like advocating for myself in a new way. I just wanted to do my studies and work. I had no interest in meeting people to like form relationships. At least not actively. Like some came up naturally and I like went with those. But my focus was on my studies. So I didn't want to like go out of my way to share information just for the sake of sharing it. Whereas now I'm at a point where it's a fundamental part of who I am. And like, I don't hide the fact and I will talk about it when it's relevant. But I realize like it's relevant in so many ways because if someone asks me like, am I married? Do I have a partner or whatever? Immediately, yes, I am married to a man. It's right there. You know, you can't get away from that fact and that the assumptions that people have. But the other thing is that like bisexuality is invisible in some ways because people don't see it unless they look at like your dating history or whatever, and they're not going to. They're only going to see what you show them, right? Which is usually the person you're actively dating because you're posting about it online, perhaps, or bringing them around to parties and things like that. But if someone does say, "Oh, you're gay," I'll correct them and say, "No, actually, I'm not gay. I'm bi," because that's when it's relevant to bring it up. Now, there have been circumstances where I've been at work and I've taken part in panels and a lot of volunteer work for the LGBTQ society. And part of that is like, you know, you introduce yourself. And so I introduce myself as Kieran, he, him, identifies bisexual. And it's because you're in a space where people are trying to learn, right? And so it's important for people who are willing to be visible. It's important to be visible in those ways, in those environments. And I think bisexuality is a particularly difficult one because people tend to be singularly minded when they think of attraction. Um, and so hearing other people talk about their experiences of it is important because you see that it's a journey. It's not just like a singular day where you realize it. It might be a singular day when you have the words for it because you've learned a new term. And it's those days when you get that terminology and you're like, oh, this is what I am. That's when there's like this upheaval on your entire worldview because then you immediately start categorizing people according to those terms. And like that's how you make sense of things at the start. You start to label everything. But then the more that you let that worldview sit, eventually things will get more complicated and you realize that, oh, the labels don't always make sense. They do for a moment, but then they can start to cause contradictions as well because, this person that you've thought of as straight suddenly comes out as gay. And you start questioning, like, oh, did I assume that they were straight? Or were they dating the opposite sex and there was evidence that they were straight? But now they're saying they're gay. And now I'm trying to figure out, like, how long did they know? How long were they lying? All of this stuff. And you just have to let go of that. Let go of those assumptions on people. I don't just really assume people's sexuality anymore because, I've been surprised so many times, we'll say, that it's just a lot of mental energy to like deal with that surprise. And of course, I'm going to have assumptions sometimes. But generally, I've got to a point where I can quash those a little bit. And like that goes with lots of different things, you know. Anyway, I think I'm going to finish up this live. A couple of things to wrap up on. So I think unexpected upheavals manifest in slightly different ways depending on the scale that you're dealing with. When you have no control over it, it can seem like it just comes out of nowhere and upends your life. When you do have control over it, the unexpected upheaval is the aftermath of those decisions because you start to question yourself. You start to wonder, did I make the right decisions? And if you start questioning all of that, you start to lose trust in yourself. Whereas if you are conscious and intentional about the decisions that you make, you can at least say, this is the best thing I could have done with the information that I had. And now that I'm in this new circumstance, I have to find a way to move forward with it. And in both cases, there is this element of, what do I do now? You give it time, you be intentional about how you recover from it, and you be kind to yourself as well. Because if you can be kind to yourself, then you'll be kind to other people, and you will find the joy that life has to offer as well in your new circumstances. When things fall apart and you pick up some of the pieces, you have to find ways to fill in the gaps. And the great thing is you get to create what fills in those gaps. And that's where, the positive end result comes from creating this new picture for yourself, where you have those breakthroughs. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again next week for next week's theme, whatever that's going to be. So I'll see you later. Keep dreaming.